Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session of dtalks or disruptive talks on education and literacy. As we are aware that the pandemic has put at risk the safety, well-being, and education of a large number of children in India and across many developing countries as well. And it is an emergency situation, as is well recognized now. And as we see that slowly the schools are kind of reopening in a phased manner in different um, states across India, we are actually coming to terms with the extent of damage which the pandemic has inflicted upon the well-being and the safety of children. And as we open schools, it's very important to make sure that when as we welcome children back to a school environment, we ensure that the environment is created in an enabling manner such that it's safe. It offers us a protected space for children, and also offers a supportive learning environment, not just to fill the learning gaps which have emerged during COVID, but also to address the socio-emotional well-being of children, which has been disproportionately impacted during the COVID. And to speak on how in this current emergency situation, what should be the way forward with respect to how government policy, how government education system, and how civil society organizations and teachers can ensure such a an environment, enabling environment for our children. We have an expert and a very eminent guest who has worked in this area for more than 2 decades. He's presently the executive director of Plan India, and he's also the chair of the Sphere India Executive Committee, and has been associated with the development and humanitarian sector for more than 2 decades. He's also been associated with Action Aid as well. So it's an honor to welcome Mr. Mohammed Asif. Asif Saab, thank you so much for joining us here on dtalks, and we are really looking forward to know about your thoughts and your vision for change on this particular topic. And we look forward to your presentation, after which we'll also have a discussion.
Uh, Thank you and namaskar. Good morning to all my friends, viewers who are joined this detox to learn about education. And my topic today will be on education in emergencies. I think, and I'll start my conversation today with a small interaction that I had had several years back when I was working with communities, children in the aftermath of the Asian tsunami, as you know, like in Tamil Nadu. So I was in one of the villages, and I was talking to a group of children, and their school had just started after a long time because the school was damaged by the tsunami at that time, and it was rebuilt by the government and NGO support, and it had got uh, uh, so when I was interacting with the children, uh, I learned that for the child, no, the restart of the school marked the end of the emergency for them. See. And that is what no, we need to understand, that for school children, for children in education, when no, education services, education processes, school education gets disrupted because of any emergency, a natural disaster, an earthquake, a flood, a tsunami, or a pandemic, as we are currently facing in our country and globally. For the child, the disruption of the education process marks the beginning of the emergency. But the moment education, school education, normal education comes back on track, the child starts believing and feeling or perceiving that no, that's now the emergency is now ended, the disaster is behind us. And that is so important for today's conversation, that why getting education and ensuring that school education no, is the first to be restarted during any natural disaster or any disaster of or any emergency, because it creates a certain sense of positiveness for the child, and that's so important for all of us. So, like in today, what we are last kind of 18 months, what we have been going through, that once the COVID-19 pandemic uh, 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 stuck, uh, children had to be kept at home because of the risk of infection. The schools were closed, and no, that did create a lot of anxiety in children. And no, though many schools, or almost all the schools, tried their best to continue with the education through digital means, through online no, learning systems, which did help some children to access normal learning. But many children did face challenges, which I'll discuss a little later, and how we can, or how we should work towards that. But the thing is that the restart of the school will mark, as I earlier mentioned, the end of the pandemic for a child. And that's so important for us. Now, coming to the question of what is it, no, what is education in emergencies, why it's important for all of us and for no, the country to be focused on. One, as I said, that education is one of the most important no, nation building efforts that needs to be continue uninterrupted. A child needs to continue with his learning process. And no, during emergencies, when education processes get disrupted, it does create a gap in the learning. It also creates anxieties. It has stress on children. No, education processes get affected. Examinations, uh, no, moving from one grade to another, no, gets no, affected. So getting the education uh, system and the education processes is of no is of enormous importance. What can we do to prevent no, such processes, and ensure that the education no, continues to happen, especially in no, and we all know that no, there are several areas or several no, geographies which are prone to certain disasters. We have the hazards map of the of our country. We know which parts of the country are affected by which type of natural disasters, and therefore, what no, has been happening is that, and globally, they've worked on the school no, safety framework. Whereas, no, what you do is to no, design school buildings in ways that they can protect or they can withstand the impact of disasters. So, creating earthquake resilient no, building structures for schools. The government is doing a great job in that space, and looking all the no, those no, architectural and construction no, designs and no, ways. Uh, Many places where there is a risk of flooding, schools have been no, built on a high platform. So it's more on the structural part of the school building, the school safety, comprehensive school safety framework that no, has been advised, and those standards no, are being reviewed and adopted by various governments, including our own in our own country, so that no, uh, schools are able to withstand the impact of disasters. Also important in this space is that no, it's not just the building but also the school water, sanitation infrastructure, the toilets, the other the playgrounds. How is it that those no, are kept no, protected, or if they can't, like I know during the Kerala floods recently, when the floods created havoc. Many schools got submerged in water because of the flash floods. And then many NGOs, government, the municipal corporations, they all came together and ensured that the playground, the school building, they were cleaned, uh, they were brought back to a situation where it could uh, uh, be okay for the restart of the education and learning processes, the classroom education processes. But that's for situations where no, the building gets affected. But the recent no, situation, the public health emergency that we are all living through currently, has a very different kind of a impact or a different kind of a response. It's not about no, creating any problem with the building per se or the structure of the school, but it's about no, creating certain challenges in accessing the school because of the risk of infection. And there no, the first response has been no, keep children back at home, which was the right step, because you needed to protect our children from getting infected, and a school is a space where no, infections could spread between and within children. But no, now the issues that is happening is that when you when we get the child back into school, what are the steps, what are the behavioral uh, issues that needs to be reinforced with the child, so that the child when she's back in school practices. And we all know that especially for the COVID-19 pandemic, wearing masks, maintaining social distancing, hand washing are super critical. They are so important ways to prevent the spread. No, and how is it that we can get no, children to internalize and practice it with no, at all times. Once the school reopens, or in many places the schools have reopened, and but when children are back in school, they practice these no, COVID appropriate behavior, so that they are keeping themselves safe and their peers in the school safe. And there it becomes very important for the teachers, because the teachers are a very important, a key stakeholder in this whole process. So how teachers help reinforce, uh, strengthen, maintain those no, those behaviors. This is with respect to the public health challenge that we are talking about. But beyond that, there are other issues, especially in other forms of natural disasters. Teachers have a very important role to play. One is in the disaster preparedness based on the hazards analysis of the area. How teachers, the school system, the principal, they all keep, they undertake mock drills. They help the child be aware of the situation, to ensure that no, they are well prepared no, when they are in school, so that the impact of the disaster is minimized or completely eliminated. So again, now the importance of the school system, the school administration, the teachers is important. And there is another stakeholder which is important, which has an important or a critical role to play in this, which is the school management committees, which comprise of not just the teachers but also of parents, of community representatives, and how the school management committee continues to maintain uh, 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 understanding and ensure that schools are a safe and enabling place for all children to learn, uh, no, to get into joyful learning, to play, to practice leisure activities, to practice, to be part of extracurricular, non-academic extracurricular activities like games and other such activities. So how does the school become a space for holistic and continued development of the child, notwithstanding the challenge that emergency or a natural disaster could create? And that is the focus. And globally, this has been under discussion. A lot of experts have been coming out with solutions, with suggestions. We are now also talking about how, especially in the aftermath of the pandemic, which was probably the first that this generation or in recent past any of us would have faced, that how the learning process continues to happen through online mode, so that for the child there is a continuation of the learning, uh, whether the child is able to come to school or is able to is staying back at home. The learning continues to happen whether the child is staying at home or is able to continue the learning So that is no with regards to the emergencies part. Let me now no, look into no, some other no, areas. No, talk about some of the important. So there are three elements to no, the education, and especially education in emergencies. One is the safety part of it, that the school no, and no, girls, boys, and teachers team work in safe environment. They are safe from the impact of a natural disaster when they are in the school. They are also protective. So there is a element of protection that gets built in, no, which comes through preparedness, no, knowing what to do, how to react, how to behave. So there is that element of protectiveness and a supportive, that there is an ecosystem which gets no, created, ecosystem which is about mock drills, it's about peer-to-peer support to address issues no, that no, get those some issues may be no, known well in advance, but there are times when we don't no, we're not aware. It's only when the pandemic or no, disaster comes through that you learn about those issues. So how do you create that ecosystem? How does the government at the frontline level, the education department people, the other school management committee members, the panchayat systems, the municipal people, how are they converging? How are they putting their efforts with one singular uh, no, ambition that no, a child's learning and education should not stop for a day, even with when there is an no, emergency or a disaster, like or a disaster situation. And so it's about preparedness, it's about getting back through effective no, rehabilitation no, methods, restart of schools, no, restart of learning, no, coming up with alternate ways of continuing with education, as no, we have all known that how many schools have no, started online training, and teachers have done an incredible job of no, ensuring that no, the child, while she is at home, no, safe from the pandemic, her education continues to no, happen. And also, how do you get all stakeholders to work together towards this purpose? Another important conversation issue in this regard is the whole question of that. While we are talking about the impact that emergencies have, especially in the learning process, we all are well aware that emergencies have differential impact on different people. It's not that, no, it may affect all in a community, every family. No, a flood may affect every family. It may affect every child, boy, girl, woman, men. But because of differential capabilities, some people are able to come back no, no, faster. Some take more time to return to normal, no, to normalcy, and this is because of poverty. It's because of certain other attributes. Gender is another important, men, women, especially because of the gender differentials that persists in many societies, many communities, many families. So how is it that no, when there is the process of no, getting back to the education system, getting back to school, no one is left behind. No, girls, there is, and many of us are aware that there are times when no, the boy is given priority over girls. So the boy comes back to school, the girl tends to be left behind. What is it that we are doing, especially when we are talking about education in emergencies, that when the return to school process happens, uh, uh, girls, people from poorer families, they are not left behind. In fact, this is one of the big concerns that a lot of educationists have been saying that no, we had done a great job over the last few years on ensuring that no, more than 90%, 95% of children no, in as per their age were in school, they were enrolled, they were learning, the learning processes were happening. No, girls, boys, they were back in school. Now the pandemic last year disrupted that process. A lot of children had to stay back, or all children had to stay back no, at home. The schools had to be closed because of the risk of infection. And now the schools are reopening. What are the efforts that we are putting to ensure that no, all children who were enrolled, they are back to school? Nobody is left behind, and that's one of the important concerns, not just no, for the pandemic, but in any disaster situations. That how can processes of return to normalcy, return to school and learning, how those processes are undertaken by stakeholders in a way that no, the every child, the last child, is also back in school. In fact, in many no, conversations, people have been talking about that it's not just no, enough to say that, okay, we have no, restarted education, we have come back to normalcy in the education space after any emergency. In fact, many people have been talking about building back better. They say that, okay, let's use the emergency as an opportunity for development. So it's not just that, oh, there was a school, there were 50 children enrolled in the school before the emergency stuck, and now you have got all the 50 children back in school. If there were three child, even pre-emergency or pre-natural disaster, who were not in school, how is it that this rebuilding, restart process ensures that those children who were not enrolled prior to the emergency, they were not in school, they were not regular, they were not learning, they're not, their learning attainments were relatively low compared to other children. How is it that they get an opportunity to to get into the education system and with the fresh vigor and resilience, and they become part of the school system. So it's about leave no one behind. It's about build back better. It's about no, agility in terms of getting no, education learning processes back with, of course, following no, any limitation, especially when we are talking about the emergency of no, public health emergency. Those no, risks have to be evaluated. But in several other emergencies, it's about getting the school, if the building has been affected or damaged, how do you get the building reconstructed as soon as early as possible and constructed better than what it was in the past, so that no, things which were needed for learning and education becomes available to children as they develop and grow in their own schools and societies. So the importance of education in emergencies, the significance is, I think, it's known, and no, I, I I have kind of tried to present a brief about how things are, and I can tell you that no, there are enough examples where no, the early restart of education after an emergency has been no, has created other or prevented other challenges for children. So the stress, the mental anxiety, the psychosocial, because it acts as a healing process. A psychosocial no, care provides psychosocial care and support. So the trauma that the emergency created to the child, no, on the child's mind, once the child is back in school, is with her peers, is with her teachers, with the principal, with the school system, in the playground, in the classroom, learning. Now, those the school becomes a space for overcoming the trauma of the emergency, and therefore, it's not just about getting education back, but it's also leaving behind the memories, the negative or the difficult memories of any disaster on the child, and ensuring that the child gets no, moving on the path to development. So it's with these kind of context, many organizations working in emergencies, in humanitarian situations, now are not just established standards like sphere network that earlier was talked about, has identified a set of standards. There is a global humanitarian standards which have been articulated, which talks about now not just the rebuilding processes, what a school should have, no, in depending on where it is located, so that it's a safe and protective space, but also what are the things that needs to be done. So how no, reinforcing of buildings and structures, school buildings and structures needs to be taken up, so that and those standards are laid out very clearly, which are being practiced by civil engineers and people who are responsible for the construction and maintenance of schools. Then we are talking about teachers training, that how does the teachers training curriculum that is there incorporates no, training with relation to their responsibility to keeping children safe in school, especially in during times of natural disasters and no, pandemics. So how teachers play an important role in the preparedness and the prevention of any negative impact of the pandemic. So that is an important part of the equation. And also the school becomes a space where parents, other important stakeholders, government or duty bearers, they all come together to ensure that how every child who is learning continues to learn, notwithstanding the emergency. So, with these words, I'll end here, and I would love to take up any questions or any clarifications or any thoughts that you'd like to have.
Thank you, Mr. Asif, for sharing your thoughts on this very important issue, and it's definitely a very challenging territory to be working with. And of course, you and your team at Plan India are leading the education and the well-being of children in very vulnerable situations. So it's truly inspiring, and thank you for sharing these ideas as well. And one thing which you talked about was how the pandemic a pandemic is actually it's not the first emergency. It's an emergency on such a large scale for this generation, but there have been other emergency situations, and you talked about natural disasters and conflict and forced displacement and other aspects. So if we talk about regions which generally face a lot of natural disasters like floods, etc., what kind of capacity building of the communities is generally required with respect to preparedness? Because as I said, like prevention, in a way, like preparedness beforehand is something which can kind of mitigate the situation rather than mitigating it after the problem has happened. So what has been some of, would you say, the successes with respect to building capacity for minimizing the disaster impact?
Great. No, good question. No, so, the disaster management structure, and in our country, we have a very robust system of disaster management that has been put in place by the government, starting from the National Disaster Management Authority. You have the state disaster management authorities. You have district level no, no, authorities, so committees, disaster management committees. So that infrastructure, that no, institutionalization of how no, the country and people are prepared no, on the face of a disaster. Then we have the national no, the disaster no, uh, the NDRF that we often hear and see in the news, how they play the front line role in the rescue and no, protection and prevention part of it. But since we talked about no, the prevention aspect, so what no, NDMA and the SDMAs, the state disaster management authorities and the national disaster management authority, what they have been doing is to no, take up no, and they've come up with a very comprehensive plan of no, how communities can play a critical enabling role in disaster preparedness. And no, every village, every community needs to have a disaster preparedness plan. So DPP. That's been talked of, and there are frameworks which are there, capacities, there are people responsible for developing the plan. And one of the elements of the disaster preparedness plan for the community is the school and the education process. So those no, the disaster preparedness plan, and in fact many of the NGOs like ours have been working with communities so that communities no, have the plan ready. No, they know whose job is to do what if and when a disaster no, strikes. And therefore, no, that plan, schools have disaster preparedness plans in place. Many schools, NGOs have been helping schools to prepare those disaster preparedness plans based on the hazard analysis. Not every school, but yes, schools which are in a flood prone area or earthquake prone area or a cloudburst prone area like Uttarakhand. So, how disaster preparedness plans are in place, and so that actions and responsibilities are shared, and people know what is my job to do in during any emergency. Early warning systems, information that comes through the med departments are studied and communicated. So those mechanisms are in place. I know no, because we are a large country, no, this is work in progress. But yeah, it's a no, it's an important step which is kind of taking, especially with climate induced disasters which we are seeing, flash floods, rains, unseasonal rains. And again, another area where a lot of work has been happening is about how do you get children engage in climate change adaptation processes. Thing. So there is a lot of work which is happening towards and this process, and hopefully in the coming years we have already seen the benefits of the work that's been taken forward by the National Disaster NDMA and the SDMAs and networks like Sphere and others, the preparedness work. And over the coming years, I'm confident that more better outcomes would be seen.
Thank you, Asif ji, for sharing your thoughts on that. And like you said, that there are these infrastructures which the government has put in place with respect to preparedness, and civil society organizations such as yourself are supporting that. If we talk in the context of COVID, and we see that this is a kind of a very unpredictable kind of a situation where data keeps fluctuating, and sometimes in certain areas you might have a case and then sudden proliferation. So do you think that this kind of a preparedness structure is it ready for COVID in India, or do you feel that there are certain gaps, especially with respect to safety of children, if you're considering that?
See, the public health emergencies are a very different, or a rather a new It's not a new phenomenon, I should say, because we all know that the public health emergencies have been happening, and we often talk about the Spanish flu as part of the discourse. But in modern times, the COVID has been one of the major emergencies. We did hear about Ebola in Africa, about SARS, the bird flu epidemic, but they have been more in the epidemic kind of stages. Pandemic, the first big pandemic has been COVID, which has kind of created disruptions globally, and particularly in the education, especially for children. So one is there is a lot of learnings that we have gained from our response to COVID. In fact, some of us, including within Plan, we are talking about how can we use these learnings. So when we are building back, we are not just building back better for girls, but we are also preparing for the next pandemic, because we know that no, COVID would not be the last pandemic that the world would have seen. Probably there could be more, but this learnings that we have got no, in terms of how to tackle it, and we have done a fairly good job of keeping our children safe, especially in our country. No, in India we have no, done no, a great job. No, kudos to the government, to the civil society, to the school administration in taking timely decisions. Now, of course, it has created impacts in the form of learning for children, but yeah, the safety first, as we all say, the safety of our children has been ensured. Now it's a question of getting back to school with ensuring all safety. And again, no, keeping these learnings, planning for a future pandemic, no, whenever it happens, is going to be a very important effort over the next couple of years for governments, for NGOs, for school management. That how does those the learnings from COVID is retained and informs future policy development in
Hmm.
this space.
Right. You also mentioned about this point. In a way, the our administration was very swift in taking action with respect to safety of children, and like the it was kind of it was decisive action, and in a way, it has kind of ensured that our children are safe in that aspect. If we talk about learning, right? So you also talked about, like, in certain emergency situations, there's a shift back to kind of remote learning, online learning, which in a way, before the pandemic, was something which was not mainstream, but now it is mainstream. And like, it might actually be considered like a mainstream part of the education system even in the coming years, even when situations normalize. But what would be some learnings, and what some successes of providing remote learning uh, to students, and like how what has Plan India's role been with respect to helping children and parents also kind of create that environment away from school remotely, so that they are so that the learning in some way is able to progress even when schools are closed.
See, before I get to that, a very important point which I think the COVID pandemic and any other disasters, also natural disasters which have been faced by different parts, has shown is that the importance of having disaster preparedness, disaster risk management, as it's often called, DRM, as one of the curriculum, part of the curriculum for education of children. So, like in many countries like Japan, which has faced the earthquake impact more than any other country in the world. So there they have it very much part of the school curriculum. So probably no, with the COVID situation and the way things have happened, we may have no, disaster risk management and climate change very much integral to the school curriculum. Probably, I think so, much more than what it is currently. So that's one. Insofar as the use of technology, especially internet and IT enabled education, was there in many schools, and schools have been talking about digitally enabled classroom education. But now the pandemic has created another element of how education can also continue outside the school, at the home, but curated and led by the teachers of the school itself through technology. Now the question is, how do you get these technologies mainstream so that everybody, all children, irrespective of their class, location, region where they are based, can benefit from that? And I'm sure over the coming years, as things progress, this will become a very important part of education. No, technology and digital learning systems no, will become a norm or a standard in that space, along with classroom. Because I don't, my personal take, and I strongly believe, is that no, it's not an either or kind of situation. Both have to be there. The digital no, learning has to be there, the online processes as well as classroom processes, where the child is not just gaining education and curricular education, but also gaining in terms of our other social determinants. So I think those are processes which are going to kind of get accelerated because of the pandemic. And the most important thing is the whole digital inclusion process, the digital empowerment process. Today, when you go into a slum, or in a village, children are talking about no, education through tablets, through mobiles, through television sets at home, and those are new perspectives to pedagogy and learning that's coming up, which has really got accelerated over the last 18 months, which has positive influence. Distance learning has really taken up no, a front seat in many basis, and this has importance for those, particularly girls, who were often getting left behind for several other reasons, not because they didn't want to be educated, but there were safety concerns. No, families were not comfortable sending the girl to school, which was several kilometers or maybe in another city. So how no, higher, especially higher learnings and centers, and no, digital learning has the power and the potential to include, bring digital inclusion at a very early stage of a person's life, and also create benefits on learning and pedagogy and education processes to continue.
Thank you, Asif, for sharing your thoughts on that. And it's yes, it's remarkable. Like you also mentioned that even sections of society which traditionally would not have the word digital in their vocabulary, be it even families from very low income backgrounds, etc., are aspirational now that okay, that the digital learning is something that they would want to kind of leverage and kind of help them reach their maximum potential as well. So it's really wonderful to also see such a pattern. Um, and another important challenge which you have raised is to get to ensure an ecosystem where children are able to come back to school, and we are seeing across different states that it's kind of now very decentralized with respect to schools opening. The decision is often with the district administration, and even before the pandemic we saw that especially in public schools, attendance, student attendance, etc., would be a challenge as well. And now with the pandemic we are seeing that the challenges of children and kind of there's a risk of a lot of children dropping out as well. And this is what all the major organizations and research is saying. What do you think has worked in the past with respect to getting children back to school, and what can we learn from our past such that we ensure again that all our children do come back to school again?
See, in plan, because we have been working with children over the past several decades, and one of the things which we have found really works wonders is to have children's groups, children's clubs in the school. And in fact, there are child parliaments or Vidhan Sabhas which are there in the schools, and it's part of their leadership development in many schools. And these groups of children who are there, they have played a an incredible role in terms of, and I've seen children's club members looking at which child has not come to school and why, going to that child's home, encouraging, engaging with the child, identifying what was the reason that the child is not coming to school, persuading the parents, talking to the child herself, and ensuring that she is back in school. And that has really worked wonders. And I'm sure, when no, the normalcy, full normalcy returns after COVID, no, those efforts would be very important. So, and in many of the schools, no, there have been teachers, the school management committees who have played a very important role, going back to the homes and ensuring that the child comes back to school. So the school management committees, the teachers, and the children's groups have to be kind of enthused, have to be supported, so that because they can play the role of ensuring that everybody is back in school and learning once we get restarted. And it has worked in the past, and I'm very confident it will work this time as well.
Right. Asif ji, in conclusion, we'd also like to ask you about in terms of preparation for disaster mitigation, for preparedness and recovery also. And we see like teachers are a very important stakeholder as well, like you also mentioned. But we also see like teachers themselves are also undergoing a lot of stress because of the pandemic, which is natural. Uh, in such a situation, what would your recommendation or advice be to school managements, to the government education ecosystem, such that they are able to create a supportive environment for the teachers as well, such that so that the teachers can then go ahead to create an environment for children?
So as I shared, the school management committees, which all schools have, comprises of teachers as well as people from the community, parents, some of the representative from the parents. So that's part of the right to education no, law as well. And most schools have a functional no, school management committees are there. What is important is to ensure, and especially NGOs like ours have to support the school managements to committees to understand what their responsibilities are, how to play that, and equip them with those capabilities and capacities so that they can play the role better. Now, what really works wonders, and I think that's again drawing inspiration from the work that happened in the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, the whole thing about Swachhata Karmis. that if we can create, and in fact in many society communities, many locations, there have been those disaster management champions of change. So once you create those champions of change and give them no, that support in the community, and there are volunteers, there are people who want to do good in their own society, in their own community, how those processes are activated so that they continue to play and create the be the champion of change in that community towards disaster preparedness, disaster risk planning, no, identifying where are the gaps and weaknesses, and ensuring that those gaps and weaknesses are plugged well in time, so that the impact of the emergency, impact of the disaster on children, on girls, on young women, on people in general in the community is mitigated.
Thank you so much, Mr. Asif ji, for this really thought-provoking presentation, and you've really raised some very important points with respect to how we view emergencies, and in a way that, like you also said, that this is not necessarily the last pandemic,
Hello.
right? And yes, yes, can you hear me? Uh, are you able to
Sorry.
hear me, Asif ji?
Yeah, I can now hear you. Yeah.
Right. So you've raised some very important points in this presentation with respect to the importance of preparedness towards emergencies, and as you said that this is not necessarily the very last pandemic that we are going to face, and in the coming time as well, our children, whether our society is able to kind of deal with these challenges, essentially, if our children are able to deal with this, and we have to build resilience in our system, in our children, and in order to do that, we have to make our systems resilient. And you and your team are taking a leadership role with respect to making education systems resilience to emergencies as well. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts of change, your ideas of change, and we hope that all those who are watching live and who will be watching this video in the coming time as well are able to use this information as well, because emergencies are something which need not only happen in the flood prone areas, or but in the coming time with respect to climate change, more and more areas are going to be at risk. So it's important that everyone across geographies are able to kind of prepare well in advance. So thank you once again, Asif ji, for joining us here on Detox.
Thank you. Thanks to the Dtalks team for giving me this opportunity. It's been no, an honor and a privilege to share plans learning on this very important platform. And I hope no, this no, the learnings from plan are taken over and replicated by others no, who are committed to ensuring that education and learning in children's no, continues. Irrespective of what no, any disaster. So very happy to have been part of this conversation. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Asif ji. The honor and pleasure is ours as well.